So just out of curiosity, how many people here have read Influence by Dr. Cialdini?
Not yet. It's on our list.
Okay.
Yeah,
I have,
Yeah.
yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Charlotte has,
Many years ago, I read Persuasion Engineering
right. So
by
Persuasion,
yeah,
it's Persuasion, isn't it? I think. So that's his second book, isn't it? Um,
right.
but Influence is was the first book. And this, to me, and this presentation is not purely about influence, but it's certainly built around the six principles of influence that Dr. Cialdini um, referenced within influence. Uh, it's one of the most powerful business books I've ever read, and the reason, and I've read it a number of times, and the reason, and in fact, even like the publisher of my first book, who ran a very successful marketing business, said he reads Influence once a year, and the reason he does, and the reason I found it a book worth going back to multiple times is it doesn't matter where you are in your business life. When you read it, even though you know the principles of influence, you've got something else going on in your business at that moment in time. And you go, oh, why am I not applying this principle of influence to this problem I'm currently dealing with? And it just is such a brilliant book at making you think about whatever current problem you're dealing with through these six windows of six principles of influence. And so that's what I really want to do today. And the idea is that really you can come back to this as often as you like, particularly if you're crafting something important, an important message, an important webinar, an important talk, whatever it is. If you apply this or written content, if you apply these principles, you're going to get far more uptake in what you do. So let's dive in. And one of the stories that I love around this, the first principle of influence is reciprocity. And I'm not sure whether I've shared this story with you before, but it's a story I've shared quite a few times over the years because I absolutely love it. So essentially, in 1985, a payment, a support payment, was sent between Ethiopia and Mexico City. And Mexico was a thriving country around that sort of time. I mean, you know, it wasn't the US, but it was doing pretty well. Ethiopia at that time was in the midst of a horrible famine and severe economic difficulties. So it would have made absolute sense for Mexico to be sending money to Ethiopia to support them. Except bizarrely, the money was actually in this situation flowing in the opposite direction. So Ethiopia, this country that was in dire straits, was sending money to support Mexico City. And essentially what it was to and so I think when they did some digging as to what had gone on here, why was this happening, what they found was in 1935, when Italy had invaded Ethiopia, Mexico was one of the few countries that publicly stood against this invasion and supported Ethiopia's cause. And 50 years later, when Mexico City suffered a devastating earthquake, Ethiopia was like, oh, this is our opportunity for payback. We've been waiting 50 years to repay the favor of Mexico, and we are going to send money to help Mexico with this earthquake. That is the power of reciprocity. When somebody gives you something, you feel compelled to repay that gift. And in fact, the Hare Krishna Society experienced this for themselves. So if you've ever been approached by one of the people from the Hare Krishna, they'll typically try and give you a flower. And the reason they try and give you a flower, or even, and obviously like little gypsy ladies have also approached with the same principle now, the reason they give you a flower is because they know, even though you don't want the flower, you now have this burning reciprocity going on that says, actually, I feel compelled to give you something back. And it just demonstrates, it's a great demonstration of how the act of giving something first, even when it's small and unwanted, can create a sense of obligation to reciprocate. And of course, what we're talking about when we're talking about influence is we're not trying to talk about conning people into something. But what we're trying to do is help them make a decision that we know in our hearts is good for them. So yes, the powers of influence could be used for wrong, but what we're trying to do is if we've got a business where we know we're adding value, we know we're helping people, by understanding these powers of influence, you can help people make much better decisions. Charlotte, could you let him? Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So it creates an obligation with who we're interacting with, and by creating that obligation, we can get them to do what we want them to do and what we know will help them in their lives in many better ways. So how did we do this in Efficient Portfolio? One of the ways we did this was giving free copies of the book away. Hi, Neil. I'll just say a quick hello. So we would give, if we'd got invited people in for a dinner or a seminar or whatever it is, we would often give them a copy of the Dream Retirement, the Life Legacy Gift, whatever it is. We would give them a copy of something at the start because we know, or even a free pen, because we know that is going to create reciprocity. And later on in that process, when we ask them to take action, we are much more likely to get the answer we want. Also, when we built our referral, can we just mute you, Neil, because you were getting some echo. We suddenly got you twice. So when we were asking for referrals, we'd have a referral sequence. So once somebody became a client, we would have this sequence of different letters, several of which were about referrals. But before we ever asked for a referral, we would send them a free copy of a book because, again, we're creating reciprocity. So with this in mind, I want you to take out or if you've printed out the influence innovation, brilliant. If not, then I'll just ask you the questions here. But I want you to first think about how can you incorporate small acts of giving into your customer interactions to build a sense of reciprocity? And second to that, what value can you offer first to your clients or partners that would make them inclined to engage with your business or give you a referral? So just think about how in your business process you can create reciprocity, which will have people doing more of what you want, whether that's giving you their business, whether that's giving you their introductions or referrals or whatever. And I'll just give you a couple of minutes to think about that. And what I would suggest with each of these sets of questions around the influence innovation is it's useful to think about this in terms of one particular aspect of the business at the moment. So for example, you might be about to do a presentation to investors, you might be about to do a presentation to potential clients, you might be about to do one to potential partners. Think about one thing and think, right, okay, how could I do that within this process? And of course, if you're thinking about giving away a book, it doesn't have to be your own book. Kenny did a very good job of creating reciprocity with me many, many years ago by sending me The Golfer's Mind. So the second principle of influence is about creating commitment and consistency. So there was a study that was done on a restaurant, and it revealed a really simple yet effective method of reducing the no-shows for reservations. So when making a reservation, customers were asked to personally commit to letting the restaurant know if they weren't going to be able to make it. And so what they did was they just changed like the wording very slightly. So what they asked when people phoned up to make a reservation for a table, what they would say is, will you call me if there is a change of plan? Instead of saying, please call if you change your plans. And the reason and it had a massive increase, a significant decrease in unfulfilled reservations. And the reason it did was because by asking somebody, will you call me? They have to answer that question, yes or no. Yes, I will call you if I can't attend this booking. Whereas please call me is like, yep, fine, done. I don't even have to answer that. It's a statement. And so there is no commitment on my behalf. When I've said, yes, I will call you if I can't make this reservation, I have made a commitment and I'm going to stand by that commitment. And that is why. So we would use this in business where we were booking people onto a seminar or a webinar or an event, and we would use this. And I don't know how many times over the years I've repeated this to the team, but remember to use this. Get commitment, because your show rate, or at least the warning of their no-show rate, will be massively better, because what you're doing is you're asking people to make a commitment, and people tend to stick by their commitments. The same was used or another example of this in perfect demonstration was what they would do is they went down. It is a study where they went down a street and asked people to put a small sign in their garden that said something. It was something to do with being eco-friendly or something. I can't remember exactly what the sign was, but essentially all they did was agree to putting a very small sign in their garden. Week or so later, same people's come along the street and knock on the door and ask, would you be willing to put a big sign, really quite an unsightly sign, in your garden with the same message? And because they'd made a personal commitment to already that they were eco-friendly and they were willing to put a small sign in their garden, they actually remarkably said yes to this unsightly huge sign in their garden, because it was forcing them, because they were essentially forcing themselves to do it because of an earlier commitment they had made. And this is actually something that they used in prisoners of war as well. So during the Korean War, Chinese captors reportedly used this principle to break American prisoners of war. So instead of severe torture, what they did was they'd start by asking them to make small statements that seemed pretty much harmless around. So it would start by saying something along the lines of, the US isn't perfect. America is not perfect. Not all of American policies are great. And once they'd got these small commitments, then actually they were able to consistently escalate them to the point where they turned them against the US, because once somebody had said the US wasn't perfect, and in fact, what they would do is they'd often broadcast it amongst the other POWs. That meant that they were kind of defending the statement that they had made, and gradually the captors would use these statements to break the prisoners' allegiance and exploiting them. So it really is very powerful. And one of the ways that you see this is labeling. And I remember David Batchelor, who a couple of you guys know, talking about how he labeled clients really well. And this stuck with me. I loved it. So in the first meeting with a new client, he would always say, I can see that you're somebody that's good at making decisions. So what he's done is he's labeled that person, and that person sits there going, yeah, that's me. I've got that label. I am good at making decisions. Of course, later in that meeting, when David's asking him to making a specific decision to move forward with his financial plan, the guy's like, well, I'm good at making decisions. I'm gonna show that I am definitely good at making consistent decisions and stick with my commitment to that. So commitment is incredibly powerful, and we can use it through labeling. We can use it through getting small increments. Another example of how we used this in our client process was, we knew we were going to ask for referrals later on in the process. So in a first meeting with a client, we would just say something along the lines of, look, we've built our business up through referrals. Assuming you're happy with it, with what we do for you later on, would you be willing to refer us to other people? And everyone's like, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, no problem. Of course, then 3 months down the line, when we say, right, we've done all of your plan, you're happy with that, who could you now refer us to? They've already made a personal commitment to refer us to people, which means they're much more likely to do it. So going back to the influence in innovation, what small commitments could you ask from your customers or clients initially to pave the way for a larger commitment in the future? And how can your business leverage the power of consistency and commitment to enhance customer loyalty? And this is going to be quick fire. Just get 1 or 2 ideas down, and then we'll move on again. So the next principle of influence is social proof. Now, as cheesy as it sounds, when you have a comedy series on, like, let's call it Friends, because my daughters continue. I don't know how many laps of the full seasons of Friends they've done, but when you're watching something like that, you get this canned laughter in the background, don't you? And you think it's actually quite cheesy. And yet the reason they consistently do it is that the research shows that by putting that in there, they end up with people enjoying and laughing at the content way more than they would if and in fact, I can't remember what book I read recently, but I think it might have been Will Smith's autobiography, but he specifically there was a friend or a family member that had a really infectious laugh, but he was also really, really switched on guy. So he always got the jokes really quickly. And every time, I'm sure it was Will Smith, because I think it was around the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but he would always say, like, we've got to have this guy in there, because what happens is he gets the jokes really quickly. He laughs really loudly. He's got this infectious laugh. Everyone else in the audience laughs. And then that creates much more infectious laughter across the audience on the other side of the screen, watching it whenever they're watching it. So despite being artificial, it actually has a significant impact on people's enjoyment of the show. And that's because it's creating social proof. Other people are laughing at it, therefore I want to be like other people, therefore that's what I'm going to do. And we see this in modern society on social media a huge amount at the moment. Of course, we have influencers showing, oh, look at me with this handbag or this pair of shoes or whatever it is. And the reason that they're being paid a phenomenal amount of money to do that is because the brands know that third-party endorsement is an incredibly powerful way of doing it. If the brand sits there and advertises these shoes are amazing, we go, well, it's the brand telling us, of course it's going to say that, and our defenses are up. When somebody else says these shoes are amazing, our defenses are down because it's a third party, even though in the back of our mind, we know that they're being paid by the company to produce this. And of course, there's lots of ways that we can achieve third-party endorsement and social proof in our businesses. We used to have as much of this on our website as possible. So we'd have images of me being on ITV, on LBC Radio, on the cover of industry magazines. Another way we did it was by entering and winning awards. So awards is a great way of getting social proof for your business and what you do. And also client testimonials. So client testimonials, and in particular, video testimonials, are unbelievably powerful. That is the second most watched or visited page on, or was the second most visited page on the Efficient Portfolio website. Videos of people telling their story of where they went from and how and essentially it's that same principle around building the story we've talked about before, which is, the loss, what was wrong beforehand, how what they did helped them, and what life is like the other side. That's really the 3-chapter story that you create with those testimonials. But it's third-party endorsement, which is incredibly powerful. So going back to the influence innovation, how can you use testimonials or case studies? And case studies are another great example of kind of talking through how a client, how you helped a client or helped somebody, and that would apply to somebody else. So how can you use testimonials or case studies to provide social proof for your product or service? And in what ways can customer feedback be leveraged to increase trust and influence among your target audience? So again, I'll give you a couple of minutes to brainstorm something there. So the fourth principle, is that where we're at? I've lost track of where we're at, but the fourth principle, I think, is the principle of authority. Now, there's an experiment that seems to have been quoted quite a few times and a lot of research around it. And it was called the Milgram experiment. It's basically where participants were willing to administer what they believed were incredibly painful electric shocks to another person under the guidance of an authoritative figure. And it really illustrates the strong influence of authority on behavior. So essentially, in this experiment, which was conducted by a psychologist called Stanley Milgram in the 1960s, and it basically explored this concept of authority and how it influenced people. So what they did was they got people in, and those people were tasked with being the teacher. And then what they did was they got an actor to be the student, and sat behind the teacher. So the teacher is the person that is kind of being researched. Was somebody stood in a white coat with a clipboard and very in an authoritative figure. And essentially what they had to do was they had to ask the student, the actor, questions. And if they got them wrong, they had to give the teacher had to give them an electric shock. And these electric shocks gradually got worse and worse. Now, actually, there was no electric shock. It was purely the actor playing the fact. But despite the fact that the student was becoming increasingly distressed and in pain to the point of almost death from these electric shocks, the teacher continued to administer them because, and despite the fact that you could see that they didn't want to do this, the authoritative figure is stood there in the right clothing with the right authority going, this is what you need to do. And it's a classic case of how authority played a role way beyond what the human being was really believing was the right thing. And in fact, if you read Black Box Thinking by Matthew Syed, there's a great example of this in where he talks about Korean Air. So Korean Air went from being having the worst safety record across all airlines to one of the best in just a fraction of 2 or 3 years. And the reason they found this was because in South Korea, people are very respectful of authority, and the co-pilot would not have the confidence to challenge the pilot, the captain, on anything because of that Korean hierarchy. And what they did was the way that they fixed it, so there was nothing wrong with the planes. The reason they went from being the worst to one of the best was because they started getting the co-pilots and pilots speaking in English rather than Korean. And that changed the authoritative measure, and they felt like that they could step forward and speak up at this point. And this all came about. One of the stories around that book comes about where the co-pilot didn't have the confidence to speak up about the plane running out of fuel while they were circling, trying to work out what was going on with whether the undercarriage was down. So this authoritative piece is really important. And when we think about it there's 2 ways there's lots of ways you can think about authority, but there's 2 specific ways that I often thought about it. One was clothing. So I once read in a book years and years ago that the most authoritative clothing for a professional man was blue suit, white shirt. So that combination of blue suit, white shirt was the most trustworthy clothing. But we would do this because there's so many studies done that show authoritative clothing has people doing what you tell them that they need to do. And so, when, for example, a security guard is dressed in their uniform, they receive way better compliance than when they're dressed in plain clothes. If you were presented with this guy and he told you to walk on the other side of the road, you'd walk on the other side of the road. I mean, obviously the gun would probably be a factor, but you'd follow. He's telling you to do it, you would do it. So clothing is very much a symbol of authority. It's a perception of status and competence. We would use this so I would make sure that all the advisors, even though nobody wanted to wear a tie anymore, we would still wear a tie for first meetings and second meetings with new clients, because it just gave that perception of authority, and we're stacking the odds in our favor of the client doing what we're asking them to do. So authority can be achieved through clothing, but even better, it can be achieved through titles and recognition. So anytime I was doing a seminar or a webinar and I'd come on to telling them about efficient portfolio, I'd always have the fact that we were regulated by the FCA, the little badge there, the fact that we were chartered, the fact that we were independent. All of those symbols were really powerful ways of giving us more authority. And the best example I can give of this is when I was doing the webinar that explained to all of the efficient portfolio clients that we were going to essentially sell up and leave for true potential. I made sure that I went through each of the 6 principles and thought, right, okay, how can we apply each of these 6 principles to this presentation? Because we need clients to buy into this. But authority was one where I was like, well, okay, I need to just drop in at random points. You know, the fact that we've been chartered for the last X number of years, or the fact that we've got the highest qualifications that we can have in our industry, we need to present ourselves as the authoritative figure so that the clients go, you're absolutely right. You guys know way more than we know on this. Therefore, I'm gonna do what you suggest. So any way that you can create an impact on perceptions and decisions, and you can achieve that through understanding the authority piece, both through clothing and through recognition and status of what you've achieved. So going back to the influence innovation, how can you establish your business as a brand, or business or brand as an authority in your industry? And what are ways that you can showcase your expertise and credibility to gain the trust from your clients? Again, I'll give you a bit of time to think. Right. Okay. So on to the next principle of influence. So the next principle of influence is liking. And a good example of that is Tupperware parties. Historically, the Tupperware party model worked. It basically essentially where friends buy products from their other friends, and it worked purely because they were buying from their friends. Essentially, they were buying not because of the product, but because they liked the host. That is why that sort of environment worked really well. And one of the principles around this is a psychological principle called the halo effect. So essentially what is going on here is that if we see someone in a positive light in one aspect, we are likely to have a positive disposition towards them for other aspects, even though those aspects might be unrelated. So somebody that's attractive to us will have other positive aspects in our mind. So for example, if somebody's known as being highly punctual, they might also be perceived as being responsible, competent, intelligent, regardless of whether those attributes are actually true at all. So a brand known for high quality products in one area might benefit from the halo effect in other areas. And so, for example, an example of that might be a tech company that's renowned for its excellent smartphones. Well, by having the halo effect, they might find that consumers are more readily accepting that their other electronic products are of equal quality and brilliance, even though they might not be. So when we like somebody or a brand, or when we perceive them as an authority, we're much more likely to attribute other positive qualities to them, which can influence our decisions and actions in a way that's consistent with these perceptions. And one of the ways that when I first bought a Tesla, I noticed that lots of other Tesla, anytime I drove past a Tesla, before they became really common, every time you drove past a Tesla driver, you would wave at each other. It's like, I like you. I like the fact that you're driving something that like me, because people like themselves. So, and I think this is one of the reasons why I was thinking about this when I was putting this presentation together. I was thinking, well, this is one of the reasons why I ended up picking up quite a few clients that played squash or played hockey. Sorry, not hockey, squash or golf. Because when somebody else likes something like that you like, you end up creating a rapport with that person. You tend to like that person. And that means, just because I remember picking up 2 of our best clients because I played squash with them. I didn't play squash with that many people, but I played these guys in the league, and I picked up 2 brilliant clients. And essentially it's because we got on okay in the squash court. And for some reason, me being an acceptable person and polite and willing to lose on the squash court meant that they had faith in me doing their financial planning. And there's clearly no link to that. There's not even that much talking going on a squash court, but it definitely applies. So how can we achieve this? Well, certainly we can make pay people compliments. So that will help that liking process. More contact with people, whether that's through social media, whether it's through basically any contact is good contact, and also through conditioning by frequently exposing your audience to positive messages, again, testimonials, endorsements, and demonstrating the popularity or acceptance of your products is a great form of conditioning through social proof. And that allows you to basically influence your audience much better. So on the principle of liking, how can you foster a likable and relatable brand or image to the business to connect more with your audience? And what strategies can your business employ to make personal connections stronger with your clients, customers? Okay, last principle of influence, because we've lost the thinking music anyway. And last one, but I think possibly my favorite. This and reciprocity are the two that I continually think back to. And this is the principle of scarcity. So we all know that when Apple releases a new iPhone, or maybe not quite so much nowadays, but certainly historically, there'll be this massive queue of people overnight waiting to get the first iPhone. And yet you wait a week and you can just order online and it's all fine. I remember this being the first time I remember this really being a thing was with the PlayStation. I'm sure when I was at uni, they released a PlayStation that you just couldn't get enough. There just wasn't enough of them out there. And it only took you a couple of weeks to get one. But because you couldn't have one, you wanted it 10 times more than you ever wanted it before. And this is the same with banned information, isn't it? If you create scarcity around you shouldn't have this information. I want to know it even more than I did before. And of course, we see this in petrol crisis, fuel crises. Somebody says, or toilet roll as we had in COVID. There's not going to be enough of this. Everyone goes out and panic buys it because they want it even more than they wanted it before. And of course, this is the principle of Black Friday as well. I was chatting to a friend of mine that runs a cycling store, and she said it's a nightmare, absolute nightmare, because now all of the November and December sales have basically been crammed into 3 days. But the reason it works is because it creates scarcity. And we all know that the Black Friday deals are no different to what they would have been like 2 weeks before or on Boxing Day. But it creates scarcity, so therefore people act in a very different way, and it creates a significant influence over us. And of course, with Black Friday, it's two things, isn't it? It's one, it's a price scarcity. So will I get that price again after Black Friday? No. And it's a time scarcity in that I've not got long till Christmas. I've only got 2 or 3 days or origin. I mean, Black Friday used to be just the day, didn't it? Now it seems like it's a whole bloody week. And then it's ridiculous. But anyway, it's creating time scarcity and price scarcity. And you see this time and again. And one piece of research that's a good example of this is in an experiment, the subjects were asked to rate the attractiveness and desirability of cookies taken from 2 different jars. One jar contained 10 cookies, the other had just 2. And the cookies from the nearly empty jar were rated way more desirable than despite being identical to those that were in the fuller jar. So again, this is a demonstration of how when there's less of something, we perceive it to be better than when there is more of something. And one of my favorite stories from the book Influence is the story of turquoise jewelry. And this is a story where, so this lady runs an independent shop, and she's got this range of turquoise jewelry, and she just can't sell it. It will not sell. And like in an act of desperation, she's going away for a buying trip, and she just leaves a note for the person that's going to be looking after the store while she's away. Just like discount them by half and get rid of them. They've done my head in. But the store support person misread the note, and for whatever reason, instead of halving the price, she doubled the price. So the lady comes back from the buying trip, and of course, all the turquoise jewelry is sold. And she's like, and the support person's like, this was amazing. How did you know that doubling the price would would cause them to sell. And she said, I told you to half the price. So essentially, price creates scarcity. And with many things that we have in our life, we don't have a measure of how good something is in other than the price. And if you think about this, I often think about, because Carol is an artist, I think about scarcity on pricing with art, because if somebody says to you, this is an amazing piece of artwork and it's £50, you go, well, it isn't that amazing, is it? You're only charging £50 for it, because you've got no other reference. Price is one of those references, one of the few references. If you said that's an amazing piece of art and it's worth £20,000, now whether you're going to buy it or not is a different story. But now I think that's an amazing piece of art. And, you know, this Monet, is that a great piece of art? I don't know. I mean, like, I'm not particularly a massive fan of it. And if you know anything about Monet, I think the research shows that he had cataracts or something else, which is why he saw everything with quite blurred vision. And that's ultimately why he painted the way he did. But, you know, that's worth a fortune today, whereas somebody else doing something kind of similar or as good might be charging £50 on Etsy for the same thing. So scarcity is also part of your pricing. And of course, in the service industry, this is a real big problem for us, isn't it? Because how do you demonstrate the value? I mean, it's one of the reasons why having your own phenomenal process and branding your own products, informational products, and having things that are unique to you is so important, because at that point, you can create scarcity in that people can't get that from anywhere else in the market. And the only reference then is the price, or one of the few references that is the price. So how can we create scarcity in our business? Well, one of the last ways that I'll just highlight that I see it happening a lot is when people are saying, come to this seminar, come to this event, come to this, you know, they create a lot. They're always, you look at any good marketeer, there's always scarcity, like limited places available, limited time offer. If you do it by this time, you'll get this bonus, or early bird discount. It's always, any good marketeer has created scarcity through their marketing. So how can you use limited time offers or exclusive deals or exclusive bonuses to create a sense of scarcity for your products or services? And what ways can emphasizing the uniqueness of your offering increase its perceived value? Just to finish this off, if you want to read or learn more about using the 6 principles of influence, obviously the best place to start is Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion. He has got a follow-up book to it called Persuasion, which I actually don't recall whether I ended up reading it or not. I think I did. And the fact that I can't recall whether I did or not suggests that it wasn't as good. But Influence itself is just an absolutely brilliant book that I would recommend to any business owner. Another book on this subject, which I think is also really powerful, is The Principle of Giftology, how you can use gifting to particularly create reciprocity. But the final way, which I love, is I know you've been listening to the Darren Brown podcast series, Kenny, but if you watch some of his documentaries, he is brilliant at showing you how he creates influence with his people. And I mean, The Push is one that's on Netflix, but there's quite a few. There was a series. There was one, and I couldn't think of what this one was called, but where he essentially creates that his own version of the Milgram experience, where he's got an audience of people are voting what happens to this person that they think is real, and he ends up getting struck by a car. But that's all about how the kind of authority and groupthink comes in. But it's a great, like, the Darren Brown stuff is a great demonstration of how you can use authority to get people to do what ordinarily they wouldn't have done. So that, I hope that has given you an opportunity to come up with 1 or 2 ideas that you can use to create some more influence in whatever it is that you are doing in your business. Like I said, this is not a tool to use for bad, but I know none of you would do. This is a tool to get people to do more of what would be good for them. Just while we've got a couple of minutes left, is there one idea that stands out that you've come up with today that you're going to implement in your business? So, Kenny, is there anything that stands out that you would implement?
There's actually been quite a few there, Charlie, that you had mentioned. One of them would be scarcity, and it's something I've been thinking about when I'm speaking. We do quite a lot around wine and chocolates and flowers and anniversaries and birthdays. We've always done that. We've never really capitalised on it, but what I'm going to just thinking, well, you'd mentioned scarcity is we're starting to build the business very slowly again in a very specific way, but just say to clients, look, we're going to take on 6 clients next year. That's it, just 6. And actually give people a sense that now, I don't need to be disingenuous about it, but nobody can really measure that, you know, but it would be a genuine thing just to say, look, we'll take them on. So that would be to give people an impression, look, it's a very limited number of new clients we want to take on, and maybe they would want their friend to be one of those 6. So that's something that I was thinking there while you were chatting. I was kind of jotting some things down. So
brilliant, excellent, good idea. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, there were a couple, well, quite a few in there for me. One of the areas that I think from Keely's perspective that we could be looking at is the quite effectively really is the liking. Because our brand is relatively new, and obviously we're trying to connect with new audiences that don't maybe know what Keelu is and what it's about. I think there's things that we can do there to understand the target audience more, provide things that we know will be helpful to them, and then in terms of getting them to make that personal connection with them is maybe sort of asking them more questions proactively, to show more of an interest in them as the user, making them feel valued and a priority to Keelu, because I think that's so that they then have that trust in us as a brand and who we are as people. Rather than just a business. So, you know, just to get that sense of us being customer focused, friendly, reliable, and you know, that we're all about giving them something that's going to be helpful to them, but also giving back.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I think on that note, it's interesting you picked that up, picked liking, because I think both you and Ian are very likable people, and therefore the more you can be speaking to and engaging with those people, the better chance you've got of moving forward. So I think that's a really good one. Neil?
Thanks for that, Charlie. Really good. 2 perspectives. One, it reminded me of some of the things we've already done that are in there, especially around the social proof on our website with videos. So that's quite reassuring. But I think probably my favourite would be scarcity. And I think the type of clients that we attract, we can create that. Like, we are building quite a big VCT program at the moment. And the way that I intend to sort of promote that, I can bring in the scarcity. And I actually had a situation yesterday where one of the VCT providers ran out of capacity, and I'd only told the guy on the morning it would probably last until maybe the beginning of January, and I had to ring him up today and said it's ran out, but they're now using the over facility. So it's sort of backed up where I told him. So I think next time I tell him something, he'll probably act a lot quicker. So I think I could definitely, using that sort of principle about the capacity, I can get people into a corner, and he also going to use that in terms of, you can't just do a BCT with us. You'd have to have everything with us, because we only take clients who we manage up. We have everything into influence, so it doesn't work. I think we can really start to narrow down who we want from there as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's really good. Excellent. Well done. Ian? Oh, you're on mute, Ian.
Yes, I looked at the small commitments, thinking that if we were to launch Keelu Light, which is an entry point, So, and then we can get them committed to Kilu Lite. So when it comes to getting them using it and excited, then we can launch a Kilu Pro for those people later down the line. But a small commitment for all of their employees or clients or whoever they are, get them in, and then we offer the premium package for their best clients or biggest clients. So two ways really of looking at those entry points.
And I think you could apply the same small commitments piece to investors as well.
Yeah.
You know, by getting a small commitment of, you know, there was, Kenny, do you remember that, Neil, there was a yes ladder, there's a yes sales ladder, isn't there? And if you want somebody to say yes to something big, you get them to say lots of small yeses, and they build up to saying yes to something big. But that again would be a classic case of making small commitments and then agreeing to something bigger later on.
Yeah.
So you might want to think about, well, okay, if for a potential investor, what could I ask them that isn't parting with any money, that would be a small commitment, which will mean that later on that they might say yes to investing. Brilliant. Charlotte, have you come up with anything? I'm not sure whether you're there or you're dining.
Sorry, I am here. Yes, quite a few things. Probably a lot more towards sort of the social proof and how to harness it for marketing. I think certainly using testimonials as adverts, for example, might be a way of doing that. We have testimonials on the website, but using them for brand new audiences and to kind of incorporate them more into marketing rather than just having them on a website might be an idea there. That's just one of them. I've got a few, but
fantastic.
wait, excellent time.
Right. Brilliant. Thank you, guys. Well, hopefully that was useful. Hopefully that's thrown out a few interesting ideas. But I would think about coming back to anytime you're writing anything, any content, a seminar, anything like that, come back to these principles, come back to this learning lunch, and think and come back to the influence innovation and use it to kind of go through that process of how can I introduce each of these 6 elements to whatever it is I do, because it will honestly will mean that, you know, in your marketing, you'll have a much greater impact if you do so.